This is Divine Evolution, and I'm Chris O'Connor. Today, I would like to talk about space-time versus time-space. It's kind of a mind-bending subject, and it encompasses a number of scientific studies, everything from Einstein's theory of relativity to Maxwell's theory on the properties of light being electromagnetic. When I use the terms space-time and time-space, one can imagine it as two separate locations. I mentioned in episode 14 about densities and dimensions how densities are the generalized locations that are vibrating at a certain level, and the vibration being the photon, and the photon creating matter based on its vibrational state. Within the densities are dimensions, which are additional layers within the density, and those layers being the experiential lifetimes of entities. Your life experience and my life experience are on different dimensions because we're in different locations within the density. To move slightly beyond that, we have to broaden our thinking. Imagine within that glass that I mentioned in densities and dimensions, you have 8 primary layers of liquid within a clear, tall glass, beginning with red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The 8th being pure white, which is the combination of all colors, and that's the reunification with God the Creator. If you would imagine existence being a location that is a giant box, and you place within this box 7 smaller boxes, like nesting boxes, and each box is slightly smaller. The smallest box is going to be the most dense because it's the most compacted. And that's the first density, or red. The next box out is second density, or orange. The next box out, and it goes up from there. If you were to take all of the boxes as a single box, the largest box, which would be the 8th, which is reunification with God, and as the largest box is the soul and spirit and love of God, consciousness of God itself. So that's the largest box. So within that box, you have these other boxes of density, and within each of those, you have an unlimited number of dimensional experiences. When we mention time-space is the 8th box. Time-space is everything within possibility of being conceived and existing. All operational circumstances exist within time-space, which is in balance with space-time. Space-time is the location and experience of entities. Okay, so let me explain this. Time-space is the metaphysical opposite side of the coin of space-time. So if we have, say, the planet Earth exists in duality, meaning that the planet exists physically in space-time. It exists in space, in our solar system, in the Milky Way. But it also experiences time. As Einstein said in special relativity, the Earth is in space, and it has a depth, a height, and a width, but it also is within time. It's existing within a period of time. Also, the Earth exists on the opposite side of this in the metaphysical state. In space-time, the Earth first exists in a location before it can experience any time. Before we can be an existing physical being, we have to take up space. Wherever you are listening, if you're at home, or if you're in your car, you're at work. You are existing at a location, and that location is 3 dimensions. You're taking up height, width, and depth on the earth right now. But it doesn't matter when you're listening to this broadcast at what time you're existing, because this broadcast exists for you right now. And this right now for someone else is going to be completely different. So that's special relativity. The Earth exists in the Milky Way, in our solar system, the 3rd planet from our central star, the Sun, at this time in its existence. On a metaphysical state, the Earth also exists in duality on a spiritual level. It must have a spiritual side because it has gravity and density. Gravity is the amount of spiritual mass that it has, and that spiritual mass is actually, there's a formulation to measuring it, though it's very minute in our human measurable abilities. Its mass takes up also a metaphysical location, which you could consider it astral realm or heaven realms. So the Earth exists in both physical space and metaphysical space. That is the difference between space-time and time-space. So space-time is existing at a place in 3 dimensions at a certain time in history. And that time span is in billions of years. So, it's a very broad, sweeping concept of time. But it is required in order to exist. So this broadcast to you doesn't exist until you listen to it, so it's observer specific. You can be in the same location you're in listening right now and not listen to this broadcast. And so this broadcast no longer exists for you, but it still exists at another space-time for another intelligent entity. The opposite of this is in time-space. There's another concept I'll mention, but I won't get into it. It's too much right now, but there's something called duality, in that we are all existing in a physical space-time, but we also exist on the other side of that in time-space. And that would be our oversoul, that would be our higher self. This is in an astral realm, this is in a heaven realm, this is in time-space. And this location exists just like we exist in our space-time now. After we die, where we go is to time-space. I explained all of that in, what happens after you die, so I won't get into that, but we leave our space-time and go back to time-space. Time-space is of a higher vibration. The photon vibrates at a higher rate so that we can't see time-space in space-time because we are not at the right vibrational state of being. And that's the point and purpose of balancing your chakras, and that's why meditation is so helpful. Once we're able to become balanced, either by intense self-adjustment or by death, then we're able to experience a metaphysical state of being, which is time-space. To sum it up, space-time is where we exist and have our experiences on a day-to-day basis. Time-space is where we experience all things of a higher density spiritual nature. Though we leave space-time and return to time-space during times of death or personal balance, we can also leave space-time when we astral project. And this is a partial leaving. This isn't a full leaving. But astral projection is in meditation and also within our sleep and dreaming. We're able to leave our body enough to have an experience elsewhere within time-space. Because we're beings of light, and that light has the ability on a fundamental level to travel only at a certain speed. It's a constant. We, in order to experience outside of our current existence, have to adjust our ability around the speed of light. The only way to do that is to adjust our vibrational being and the phase at which we vibrate, and our consciousness vibrates. Our consciousness vibrates at the same rate as light. So there's no adjustments for conscious, and I want to say thinking, but it's really not thinking, it's a knowing. Knowing and understanding that the speed of thought and the speed of light are equal, which is why the concept of space travel is so fascinating, because to travel great distances isn't necessarily a thing that you do on a physical level. It can be 100% metaphysical. And in the metaphysical, a being that has balanced themselves to such a degree that they can tune and adjust and activate each of their chakras so that they're all vibrating in a unison way, which creates this bubble around them, this bubble of interdimensional vibration, and it's compatible with all densities and all dimensions. Once this entity is able to create this bubble around them, then they can travel instantaneously within any density and any dimension and any layer within those dimensions, because it's the same vibration as the eighth box. And the eighth box being the totality of all existence, which would be the Creator's consciousness. And the consciousness is what created the universe, and the consciousness is where the universe will experience all 7 other boxes before returning once again to the density of the eighth box. When an intelligent entity is able to travel through thought, they are then only a mere thought away of returning to unification with the Creator. It's their choice to either be reunified or to remain an experience within time-space and space-time. One could live godlike. That has happened. That's why there are so many differences in culture on Earth, is because people saw entities that were able to perform thought travel or able to simply create something from thought, which would have been seen as magic. This magic, having been interpreted as positive or negative, good or bad, then that entity is seen as an evil spirit, Satan perhaps, or as a god, depending on the understanding of the observer. Just like you can be listening to this broadcast at the same time as another person, but you'll be in a different space. So your space-time is different. In the same way, when an individual saw some intelligent being perform some task, especially a couple thousand years ago, well, that being is more advanced. And they're able to transmute things like Jesus transmuted water into wine. It was seen to be magical, but it was seen in a positive way. Those observers saw that act of Jesus in a positive manner. He did a great number of things. When he was a child, he brought a sparrow back to life. He didn't understand, I'm guessing this part, that he didn't understand exactly what and how, but he understood at some instinctual, maybe even a subconscious level, that he had the ability. He remembered somewhere that he was a being of great ability and was able to perform this magical act by bringing back the sparrow from death to life. He also did the opposite accidentally when he was a very young child. In anger, he touched a friend, and the friend died. Well, this is when Jesus realized that he had great ability, and then he, at that point in time, had to make a decision if he was going to use this ability in a positive or a negative way. And he chose to use it in a positive way. Fortunately for a great many people, when all of his experiences began was when he understood who he was, that he was a being of a great ability. So in this example of Jesus having the ability to transmute from life to death, death to life, or water to wine, was working in a space-time, but it was his time-space oversoul that was performing these acts. So he was existing in a conscious level in both space-time and time-space. And that's where you and I need to get to truly be enlightened and to truly help bring all of humanity along. All individuals throughout history who have been seen as great individuals in a godlike manner or in a reverence, where they were seen so very different from you and I. But in reality, any truly understanding, truly knowing, intelligent entity would never say that they were different. They would always emphatically speak of the sameness of all of humanity, because they understood the concept. They understood that they were only a part of something much greater, and that there was no difference between them or any other, though they were able to perform tasks and bring forth spiritual understandings in a different way, perhaps a greater way than others. There was never one of them that said they were a better individual. And that stands for today still, of course, which is why within our realm of space-time, it's so important to take ourselves into consideration and to take our actions into consideration, both good and bad, understanding the broad sweeping implications it can have on the total understanding of all human beings, and take responsibility for ourselves and be a greater space-time being. Thank you all so very much for listening. And if you have questions or comments, please feel free to send an email to divineevolutionpodcast at gmail.com. That's divineevolutionpodcast at gmail.com. And of course, I'm on Twitter, and we're also on Instagram. Feel free to send a message there as well. And don't forget that we love you and that I love you. Until next time, I'm Chris O'Connor.